I joined the army because of freedom. I want my people to live in our own home on our own terms. Now that I've met my 2-month-old twin daughters, my only dream is for them to grow up alive and in a peaceful Ukraine. I don't want to immigrate. I was born here and I want to raise my daughters in my country. This war is horrifying, bleak, and impossible to explain to civilians who don't live it. I ask for your help and pray you never find yourself in our position. This is an article written by a Ukrainian soldier at the front named Sergey, who is a Bradley commander in the Ukrainian 47th Mechanized Brigade, an experience he's going to talk about in this article. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it's because we've fundraised for Sergey and his unit on this channel before. It's an honor to call Sergey a friend. And this article that was published in HuffPost on March 12th, I feel like is really important. It's highlighting a gap in our understanding that I've noticed in the United States, at least, where we fail to recognize that these Ukrainian soldiers are just like you and I. We have more in common than we don't. The only major difference right now is they are in a position where they are forced to fight for their lives, for their family, and for their freedom. So I thought it'd be perfect to highlight Sergey's story here to give you a little insight into just one of many Ukrainian soldiers. He says, before the war, I was a printer in Kyiv. I had traveled the world, met my wife, and started a small business making advertising materials and t-shirts. Like many others, I had plans for the future and dreams of a peaceful life. Now I serve in the Ukrainian army, not because I am choosing war, but because the violence came to my doorstep 3 years ago. Since Russia began its campaign to control our country, I've had no choice but to stand and defend my home, my people, and our freedom. I want to share what the invasion has taught me about the value of freedom because it is essential to peace. And right out the gate, I think a perception that a lot of us have in the United States, at least, is when we hear of soldiers, we think 18 to 22-year-olds that maybe bypassed college and are looking for a different career or a temporary career before they move out into the professional world. That's by and large what our military is made up of, young men and women, 18 to 22 years old. We don't have a lot of professionals that were out in the workforce, earning a living, running their own business like Sergey, that the time came and they were forced to, or in Sergey's case, chose to fight for their country. He says, when I think about peace, I think my family and how it has grown. Recently, my wife and I welcomed twin daughters into this world, but instead of looking forward to their first steps or first words, I find myself asking, will they grow up free or in an occupied land where everything Ukrainian is erased? At the same time, I hear U.S. thought leaders like Elon Musk ask what Ukrainians are fighting and dying for. After 3 years of war, a war that has killed our friends, injured me, and threatened my family, hearing such words is unbearable. The answer to Musk's question is simple. We are fighting for our right to exist as a nation. I used to think this answer was American in principle, and in the spring of 2022, most Americans stood with us. We couldn't have survived this long without the United States' support. I literally owe my life to it. Commanding a Bradley infantry fighting vehicle supplied by the United States has saved me more times than I can count. And I can attest to that. Sergey is always so quick to talk about how wonderful the Bradley is and how if he wasn't in a Bradley at certain times and instead was in an old Russian vehicle that the Ukrainian military had at the start of the invasion, he and his crew likely wouldn't be here today. These men, in countless examples in my conversations with them, are overly thankful, nonstop, for the assistance the United States has provided. But real quick, a humanity piece here, if you will. The twin daughters at home. I want you to think just this war isn't an isolated event happening at the front with soldiers on the two sides shooting at each other. They're families back home all throughout Ukraine. They're raising their children with the fathers gone at the front. Some, of course, not coming home, tragically. Life goes on. And for so many Ukrainians, millions of Ukrainians, this life going on is in the middle of a war zone where they're dodging Russian missiles and drones day in and day out. Again, they're like us, but in an awful situation that I think many of us could never imagine. He says, between the man-made horrors of the modern battlefield, mine explosions, and drone strikes, thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have been pulled from combat alive thanks to American equipment, training, and aid. Your country's support doesn't just help us liberate our homes, it keeps us alive and able to return to them. But since Donald Trump has come back into office, everything has changed. Watching his meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky in the Oval Office on February 28th made one thing clear. Trump is determined to end the war at any cost, without any concern for what happens next or the destruction it may cause to my people. It appears the President of the United States has a different understanding of peace than we Ukrainians do. And he doesn't care what our country looks like the day after his deal goes through, because he simply wants to be the man who ended the war. He speaks about caring for Ukrainian soldiers, but he recently blocked critical aid to Ukraine, and this led to our army being less able to defend itself as the casualties continued to mount. This, of course, was following the interaction in the White House. The United States shut off intelligence sharing and military aid to Ukraine immediately. Equipment that was in Poland ready to move across the border was stopped. Now, as of this recording, that has been turned back on, but a pause like that in any degree in the middle of a war zone is, and likely did in this case, cost Ukrainian lives. He says, one soldier who was killed was a friend of mine. He died in my arms in the ruins of a house, a place that was once someone's home. I held his hand as he became delirious and began speaking to his wife as if she were there with him. He told her how much he loved her, that she needed to finish their home renovations, and that they would send their son to school. He was a builder who joined the army voluntarily in the first days of the invasion. I held him as he died and thought about how another wife is left without a husband, another child will not have a father, and another mother will mourn her son. I think of him when I hear American leaders say Ukraine is responsible for this war. He says, every war eventually comes to an end, and like every Ukrainian, I dream of the day when peace finally returns to our land. We want to live, build our future, and shape our nation, a country with 1,000 years of history, but what kind of peace are we being offered? The recent talks between Ukraine and the United States and the discussion of a ceasefire bring a glimmer of hope, but will Russia agree? I highly doubt it. And even if it does, what happens next? History has proven time and again that agreements with Russia hold no value, and I have no illusions. The Kremlin will never abandon its imperial ambitions. If left unchecked, it will regroup, rearm, and strike again. And this is a sentiment that we see clearly throughout much of Eastern Europe. It from my perspective, it tends to reduce in intensity the further people get away from Russia. But those countries that are that butt up against Russia today and formerly either in or up against the Soviet Union know this all too well. They have seen how Russia operates. They have seen what Russia's intentions are, and you're not going to hear it any more bluntly than from people like Sergey in Ukraine facing it firsthand day in and day out. He says the citizens of Ukraine now know the cost of Russian promises. We remember the names of people who are no longer here today because Vladimir Putin lied. Those lies mean I can't watch my children grow up. My mother's hair is turning gray from the stress of knowing her only son is at war. I don't know what the future will be for the people I love or myself. Still, I will keep fighting because I refuse to let my country be swallowed up by Russia. Ukrainians, Europeans, and Americans can't take more time learning that Putin is not ready for peace. This whole nightmare would end if Russia left Ukraine. Although the war has taught me a lot, I don't understand why Ukraine, the victim, is constantly pressured to compromise while the aggressor faces no real consequences. We are smaller, but we are not lesser. The United States has never shied away from standing up to tyranny. I want to know what has changed now. What security guarantees will Ukraine receive, and from who, when the U.S. is retreating from Europe? Who will ensure that evil does not go unpunished, that the massacres, the destroyed cities, and the hundreds of thousands of innocent lives lost are not forgotten? A ceasefire without justice is not peace. It's merely a pause before the next war. A forced freeze of the front lines as they are today would not end the war. It would only postpone the next stage of Russia's aggression. Why should we surrender our land? Why should we be asked to accept the destruction of our homes and the slaughter of our people as something to be forgiven? I cannot forget. I will not forgive. I think it's worth mentioning here that there's no easy solution to the end of this conflict, right? It's not as though you just push a button and it's all over, but right now what we're seeing a lot of is a push for Ukraine to cede as much as possible and possibly set the stage for Russia to just continue this war at some point on down the line. Sergey says, to me, this is not peace, it is surrender. It is a betrayal of the free and democratic world in the face of growing dictatorships. A rushed ceasefire driven by political expediency will not bring stability. It will only plant the seeds of an even greater war, and as always, it will be ordinary Ukrainians who pay the price. Lives that seem to matter to Western politicians only in their speeches. I know that many Americans support us and are angry with their elected politicians for turning their backs on Ukraine, and I thank them. I'm afraid of dying and leaving my family behind. I'm afraid of being maimed while fighting and becoming a burden to my wife and children. The best of Ukraine is fighting and dying. The most honorable and the most courageous are trying to bring freedom to our people. I joined the army because of freedom. I want my people to live in our own home, on our own terms, Now that I've met my 2-month-old twin daughters, my only dream is for them to grow up alive and in a peaceful Ukraine. I don't want to immigrate. I was born here, and I want to raise my daughters in my country. This war is horrifying, bleak, and impossible to explain to civilians who don't live it. I ask for your help and pray you never find yourself in our position. And hopefully this article that will be linked in the description below, of course, gives a better idea to at least a few people what exactly is going on in Ukraine and how these people that are us, just in a different country, they were born in a different place, no different than you and I, are dealing with a situation that is hard to fathom. Again, imagine a new father here, Sergey, of young twin girls, having to leave them for a period of time and go back to the front to try to protect them and their freedom and their country of Ukraine. And one last thing that I want to hammer home here is this 110% was written by Sergey, a Bradley commander in the Ukrainian 47th Mechanized Brigade. I've interacted with Sergey on a number of occasions, and he's an incredible writer. He's very articulate, and no doubt in my mind he put this together. In fact, I know some of the people, fortunately, behind the scenes that helped organize to get this to Huffington Post. So incredible article, powerful article. I'm so grateful that Sergey put this together, and hopefully it reaches more people than ever. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.